Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of my Witcher Netflix Season 2 episode breakdowns. So, if you're new to the channel, when Season 1 of Witcher Netflix first launched, I went through and did a series where I went and talked about each episode of Season 1 and just kind of shared my own personal thoughts on the episode, some things that I liked, things that I didn't like, and just general commentary on each episode. And it was a lot of fun, and I got a lot of really great discussion from many of you in the comment sections, and we had some actually very good discussion on the Witcher series in general. From a Witcher fan myself, I have read the books, I have played the games, and I just am in general a very, very big Witcher fan, so I love sharing my thoughts with all of you. So in this episode, we are going to be talking about Episode 1, A Grain of Truth, from Season 2 of The Witcher Netflix. So before we get into the episode breakdown, there's one thing I want to do differently for this series than the previous series that I did. For each episode, I want to show off a cool Witcher thing that I have, because in the past couple of months, I've gotten quite a lot of new Witcher stuff, and it's all really freaking cool, and I kind of want to flex it. Let's be real, I want to flex all my cool stuff, but it's also just a way for me to share with you guys, because many of you who are watching are also really big Witcher fans, so I want to show off some cool stuff that I have, and maybe it'll inspire you to also throw your money away on cool things. So each episode, I am going to, before we get into the breakdown, show off one of the cool things that I have. So I wanted to start off with this awesome version of The Last Wish, which is the first book of the Witcher saga. This is an illustrated version of The Witcher, The Last Wish, and I got it recently, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It's a hardcover, which first of all is amazing, and it has many different illustrations of the particular short stories within The Last Wish. And so when you first open it, you get a preview of all of the art that you're going to see later on, including several characters, familiar characters, of course. And as you go through it, you get to see all of that artwork. So as you look through, you can kind of get a different, some different images here. This one of Geralt fighting the Striga in the first short story. And there's also A Grain of Truth, which we're going to be getting into in this episode, where he's visiting Novellan's manor. And of course, The Last Wish, which has this artwork of Yennefer. I'm just a big fan of this illustrated version. It's a beautiful hardcover. Underneath the sleeve, there is a quote from Geralt. People like to invent monsters and monstrosities, then they seem less monstrous themselves. It's just an absolutely beautiful hardcover illustrated version of a great book. So if you're interested, I'll have a link below on where you can get it. It is available on Amazon. I saw it was at Barnes & Noble as well, so it's pretty easy to get a hold of if you want to get a beautiful version for yourself. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into Episode 1 of Season 2, A Grain of Truth. For this series, by the way, I decided that I wanted to start trying to write out a script for these breakdowns rather than my general ramblings, which tend to go on for a bit too long. So if you see me looking down at my screen, that's because I'm referring to the notes that I wrote out. So Episode 1 was, in short, it was an explosive episode to bring us back to the world of The Witcher. And say what you will about the rest of the series, and trust me, I will have a lot that I want to say about the rest of Season 2, but this particular self-contained episode did a great job drawing you in to kind of get you hooked, and I think that's something that the showrunners have said they want to do for future seasons as well. They want to start with this self-contained short story. They may even draw other short stories from some of the from The Last Wish or Sword of Destiny, and bring those in to be these awesome episode openers. So in Season 1, we had the Renfri story, of course, and in Season 2, you have the Novellan story. And I think both of them do a good job making that impact to hook you in to the rest of the series. And so I'm curious to see what they may or may not do for future seasons as well. There were so many things in this episode that I want to talk about, and I've already watched this episode several times. I've watched this more than any of the other episodes in the series. My first time watching it was at that little online fan premiere that they did. For those who don't know, they had like you could sign up to have a virtual premiere of episode 1 of The Witcher Netflix. It was on that Tuesday before the series released on the Friday. So that was my first time watching it. And then I watched it again that Friday. And then I watched it again with my friends at the Breakfast and Beauclair Witcher podcast. We did like a viewing together for a holiday party. One of the opening scenes is the aftermath of the Battle of Sodden Hill, which we did see at the end of season 1. Tissaia and Vilgefortz are looking through all of these bodies that are just ridden on the battlefield, and Tissaia is crying out for Yennefer, but Yennefer seems lost. Now, this is already a change to the show that they're doing in comparison to the books. So in the books, Yennefer did fight at Sodden Hill, and it was a rough battle for her, but people knew she lived. Triss Merigold, on the other hand, she was the 14th one at the hill. She was the one that was pronounced dead, but actually lived. So now we have reverse, where it's Yennefer who's pronounced dead, but we later find out in the series, or actually we later find out in this episode, that she actually lived. Now it does look a lot like Yennefer is dead to those who are closest to her. And in this scene, we see Geralt and Ciri show up, which when I first watched this, I was actually surprised. I was like, oh, hey, Geralt, how convenient for you to show up. I mean, I know that at the end of season 1, when Geralt and Ciri reunite, they are not far from Sintra, and the Battle of Sodden Hill obviously took place a little, away from Sintra, where Nilfgaard was. So, like, in my mind, I'm trying to visualize where they would have been, where Geralt and Ciri would have been in relation to the battle, and how quick they were able to, meet up with Tissaia. It just all seemed kind of weird pacing wise. But again, this is a show, and I understand that in the timeline and trying to fit everything in what they want to fit in, they just kind of had to make this happen. But I will say that I feel like this is a problem that recurs throughout this series, and something that I think many folks have complained about thus far is that time, in season 1, there were multiple timelines that confused people. And now I feel like in season 2, we're jumping around and characters are just showing up places without any real sense of time and how much it takes to travel around the continent and the northern kingdoms. So to me, it felt a little off, but obviously it's not like a big thing to me where it suspended my disbelief of the scene or anything like that. So Tissaia, who doesn't really know who Geralt is, lets Geralt know that Yennefer is dead or gone. And it's actually kind of sad. There's the scene where Geralt begins to walk away from Tissaia back to Roach and Ciri, and the camera makes it very apparent to focus on Geralt walking and showing that kind of anguish in his eyes. So we know that, Geralt still feels very strongly for Yennefer, and the fact that she is gone is really hitting him hard in that moment. And, again, a minor criticism here, but he's very quick to listen to Tissaia and assume that Yennefer is dead. But again, for the sake of the story and moving everything along for a short 8 episodes, I can understand that he would just kind of accept this and just kind of feel that pain and anguish that she's gone. So with that knowledge between Ciri and Geralt, the two make their way off, continuing north away from Sodden toward Kaer Morhen. And we get a scene where Geralt and Ciri begin their own conversation and getting to know each other a little bit better. And I think that that's something that's very important to establish, especially in this first episode. Ciri talks about her nightmares that she's been having with the Black Rider, which is one of the opening scenes in the Blood of Elves book. And of course, we get a very famous line in this scene where Ciri asks, "So I'm your destiny?" And Geralt says, "You're much more." So this line, I think, was an anticipation anticipated one for season 1, because this line is from one of the short stories, Something More, and it's a very emotional and impactful moment within the book series. And here in the show, it's said kind of more as a general comment. It doesn't have the same impact as the books, but I don't absolutely hate it. I think that it's just like, oh, he said the thing, yay! And he acknowledges to Ciri in that moment that, yeah, you're something more than just my destiny. By the way, I do like the show does have some of the aftermath of the Battle of Sodden Hill from the Mage's point of view, because as we all know, war is brutal for soldiers and for mages, and we get to see that firsthand. So Vilgefortz and Tissaia have a lot that they need to figure out, and we even catch our first glimpse of Triss. And again, in this version of the story, we know that Triss is alive. The mages know that Triss is alive, and she's deeply burned from the battle, which is a very accurate thing to the book. And I actually loved seeing the scene at first because we really see Triss in so much pain. And at first when I saw it, I got emotional. I was like, no, my girl Triss, don't hurt her. Then we cut to Tissaia, who has a certain captive. The mages were able to capture Cahir. Very interesting. From season 1, we got Cahir, who was in a battle with Vilgefortz, and now he's been captured. And now it's torturing time. This is a very well acted scene, and I love Tissaia in this moment. But she does say a very prominent line here. Hi, this is Editing Tracy speaking. So originally I included the audio in this upcoming clip, but YouTube blocked my video. So I had to remove all of the clips with audio, but I still wanted to include this particular line, so I decided I'm going to do my own video of the scene so you can still get the impact. If evolution has traced any groove at all in your brain, I will plow it somewhat deeper, and then you will know what a scream can really be. So fun fact, in the books, Philippa says that line in Blood of Elves, but they gave it to Tissaia in the show, and I'm not mad about it, I swear. If you know me, Philippa is my favorite character in the books. So when I saw this, I was like, hey, that's Philippa's line. I think that it worked well for the scene, so I'm not like actually mad about it or anything, but I was just like, hey. So now let's talk about the meat and potatoes of this episode. Geralt and Ciri arriving at Novellan's manor. A Grain of Truth, the adaptation. This adaptation of A Grain of Truth hit heavy. I would almost say it hit heavier than the books. Dare I say it? It's just a different impact. I've seen some of my friends say that they didn't like this adaptation of A Grain of Truth, and many people feel A Grain of Truth is actually their favorite short story. It's not one of my personal favorite short stories, but a lot of Witcher fans really love this particular story. So there was a lot of high praise and expectation that probably was going into this, but I thought that it was overall, it was different in its impact, and I actually liked it. Before I get into the different impact, I do want to say that we can already see the improvement to the quality of the show and the higher budget overall. Novellan actually looks really good and not super cheesy. I honestly think he looks even better than the Beast in Disney's adaptation of Beauty and the Beast, their live action adaptation. And Christopher Hivju is an awesome actor. He does a great job as Novellan, and they still capture the spirit of Novellan, I feel. He's a beast, but he has a complicated history. But he's still like a jokester. He still has this lightheartedness to him that we saw in the books and we even see now in the show. I gotta say, I'm disappointed that not once did Christopher Hivju say pox on it, because Novellan says pox or pox on it at least 30 times within the short story. And we didn't get to hear it once. Anyway, it was interesting to see Ciri added into the mix for this version of the story. In the short story in the book, Geralt is not yet reunited with Ciri, and when he meets Novellan, it's just the two of them. Ciri is not here yet. But adding Ciri in this case was fine. And they did find some interesting ways to add cool moments into her story. And this is, again, the first time we're seeing Ciri around Geralt. And we didn't really get a lot of Ciri dialogue in season 1. So now we're getting to see more of how Freya Allan is portraying young Cirilla. And I feel like that was something in this episode that I was absorbing a lot. Okay, so let's talk more about Novellan's story here. Another change up is that in the show, Geralt and Novellan are old friends, and apparently Geralt knew Novellan when he was in his human form, but that's not necessarily how it is in the books. He had actually met Novellan for the very first time when he first stumbled upon his manor, and Novellan welcomes him in, they have dinner, and Geralt begins to learn about Novellan's past 12 years as a beast and how he got to this form and how he had been trying to find a way to break the curse. And one thing he was doing was paying merchants, local merchants, and, spending time with their daughters, which sounds a little weird, but in the context of it, he didn't do anything weird to the daughters. He just kind of wanted some company. And a lot of these girls ended up just enjoying the company of Novellan, but none of them actually fell in love with him until he met Verena. So that's like the quick TLDR of the book version, which they didn't really get into any of the other girls that hung out with Novellan. Basically, it's all about Verena in this adaptation. So here's where things get real interesting. In the show, Novellan tells Geralt and Ciri at dinner that he was cursed by a priestess after he apparently was high on shrooms or something, and he desecrated the temple. And that's pretty bad, okay. And as he was sharing this information, I was a little confused because I thought that they were changing the origin story a bit of how Novellan came to this beast form. For those who have already watched the episode, you know that that is not the case. It's actually, they reveal it later on, and we'll talk more on that later. But in the first time that I was watching it, I was like, oh, okay, they're changing Novellan's origin story. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's for the better. It's a pretty heinous thing that he did. And so I was just kind of accepted that. And then I was like, okay, well, they changed it. All right. And moved forward with the episode. Now we cut to Geralt and Novellan and Ciri bonding in different ways. And I think at this point, Geralt is pretty sus of Novellan, as they've all been hearing some weird creaking in the floorboards above, and it's beginning to be a little sus. So Geralt decides to go outside and investigate and, of course, brood over Yennefer. Meanwhile, Novellan and Ciri get to have a nice moment with this lantern scene. And once again, I was just loving the cinematography of this particular scene and was like, wow, this is really cool. And so he begins to tell the story of an elven woman and a human mage. And it is, of course, we learn to find out that this story is a lot of Ciri's ancestors and their story, the story of Lara Doran. For, those of you who are very much into the, Witcher book lore and everything like that, the first time hearing this story, it does sound a lot familiar. Things are a little different because I believe that Lara Doran was a mage, and this is saying that she's like a warrior of sorts. So, at first I was like, is this the Lara Doran story? But sure enough, it is, and it's very, very interesting to see them break this story and do a little bit of that foreshadowing of what's to come and talk about this particular story. It wasn't done by accident, and it was really cool. As Novellan and Ciri are talking more, he talks about says his line that monsters are more than fangs, and etc., etc.
Monsters are more than just horrid looks and claws and teeth. Monsters are born of deeds done. Unforgivable ones.
This line is where I began to see a hint of what was to come. Novellan is hiding something. Oh, He's hiding multiple things, actually. Then Geralt and Novellan get to have their little drinking game bonding scene where we, of course, get more exposition and some great dialogue. Soon we get to meet Verena, who is living in the manor. Once again, a little different from the book, but totally fine for this retelling, in my opinion. Verena is done so well. When she first appears in the room, it's just major Exorcist vibes, very creepy, but also slightly sympathetic. As she talks a little bit to Ciri, and Ciri begins to feel sympathetic toward Verena. But of course, Geralt eventually senses the danger and identifies her as a Bruxa, a very dangerous and powerful vampire. They proceed to go outside and fight. And the fight is interesting because Ciri very much sympathizes with Verena and doesn't want Geralt to kill her. And by the way, I love the use of sound in this particular scene and the use of the sound in the environment. There's like this echolocation sound as Verena is flying around, and it was just such a cool scene to just absorb in that moment. And of course, Geralt assumes his dad mode and tells Ciri to run, and he later scolds her when she doesn't run. But Ciri does stand her ground, and unfortunately, that makes her vulnerable to a grapple from the Bruxa. And just as all hope seems lost, we get our boy Novellan, who comes in with the pole kill. The whole pole scene was so good. My jaw just dropped the first time that I watched it. In the books, the pole kill is a pretty big part, and it's just one of the coolest parts of the short story, in my opinion. And I've seen pictures of this scene, like people have done artwork of this particular scene, and Sapkowski describes it very vividly in the short story. But seeing it in live action was, oh man, they just captured such a bone-chilling moment where Verena turns her head 180 with her body still facing forward and begins pulling herself toward Novellan and telling him that she truly does love him. And just as she's about to bite Novellan, Geralt comes in with the head decapitation, just like in the short story. And Geralt, once again, is the one that kind of has to always do that dirty work. He has to finish the job. Even when he doesn't really want to, he kind of has to. And he did that. And oh gosh, it was such a good scene. It was powerful, it was impactful, and it gets better. Novellan turns to his human form, and we learn that there is indeed a grain of truth in those stories. The Bruxa and the Beast truly did love each other. Love and blood, very powerful things.
Love and blood. They both possess a mighty power.
But now, Novellan tells them the true reason for his curse and what he truly did to that priestess. And they walk away from him and leave him. And wow, I got chills in that moment. I was not expecting this to be where Novellan opens up about the truth, and something about this scene makes it way more impactful. They get to know this man, this beast, and it turns out he had a heinous part of his history, his curse, and they only learned about it right at the end. He even let Verena kill all of those people in the town that was completely vacant. I had to really unpack this scene. I've already done a lot of book comparing, and that's something that I'll probably do for the rest of the series as well. It's just like, I don't know, in the book series, we learn about what Novellan did to that priestess early on in the story. Well, during dinner, he brings it up and he shares the full story, and he's completely truthful with Geralt in the short story. In this, he leaves it out. He doesn't want to fully admit it at the dinner table, and he decides to come up with, this other reason for why he was cursed. And I don't know, in the short story, I think it makes sense for what it was, because we learn the full story of Novellan, that, he did a horrible, heinous thing, but he's kind of a softie as well, because he had the option to rob from merchants and scare them all away, but he actually felt bad for merchants, and he gave away all of his father's money to all of these people who were struggling. And that's where Geralt slowly begins to realize that Novellan isn't really a beast. He isn't really a monster. He's a beast, and he is cursed, and there's probably a way to lift the curse. And I don't know, the fact that you get to know Novellan and his good side first, and then he reveals the truth at the end, it just had a whole different impact, I feel, to the entire story than from what we read in the books. It still has a very tragic ending one way or another because of Novellan mourning the loss of Verena, but man, I keep saying it, but it hit different. That's all I can really say. The final thing I'll say about this episode is Yennefer's brief role. We learn that she is captured by Nilfgaard, or Fringilla specifically, and she has some conversation with Fringilla, and we learn at this point, we don't get a ton of her story in this episode. I feel like I wasn't sure where they were going with this. I'm like, are they about to take Yennefer back to Nilfgaard? What? And then, of course, that's not necessarily what happens, because suddenly arrows come flying from the forest, and the episode ends there. So to me, I was very excited to see the end, because I knew exactly whose arrows those were. I knew that was Scoia'tael. They don't say the term Scoia'tael, but the elves are here, and it gets me very excited. So overall, episode 1, I gotta say, yeah, episode 1 was definitely my favorite of the series. Like I had said earlier, it is a self-contained story, really. The big bulk of it, of course, being Geralt and Ciri's story with Novellan, and it's a different take on A Grain of Truth, but still captures the sad somberness of A Grain of Truth in its own unique way. And it's a very explosive start to the series. That's all for me as far as the breakdown goes. I would love to hear your comments on this episode and what you thought of this adaptation of A Grain of Truth. I will, of course, be back for episode 2 in a week or two, and I will be continuing my Witcher book club and finishing up Blood of Elves, because we need to finish that book, and we need to talk about the last few chapters of Blood of Elves. So feel free to subscribe to the channel and all of that good stuff if you want more Witcher content. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.